watching Morning at NTV.
22 minutes to the top of the hour, 8 a.m. But we still do continue with Morning at NTV. My name is Priscilla Regina Naloga. Now we step into our Kickstarter conversation, one that is actually going to break down for us the themes and the things that we're seeing out there regarding journalism. Today is World Press Freedom Day 2022. We get to celebrate this. In the freedom of a pandemic that is now reduced, we can now go back to doing things normally, especially as far as journalism is concerned. It was hard-capped in one way or another, and yet it had the tool to actually defend, protect, and save this country from COVID-19. An American writer, Alice Walker, writes and says that we have the power to save that which we love. Now, many of us love journalism. The question is, do we have the power and the will to save it for those that love it and those that need it? Under the theme journalism under digital siege, we're going to be having these conversations with seasoned journalists, those that have been here, done it traditionally, but in the wake of the digital era, what are the challenges and the hiccups, but also the opportunities? We do have Dr. Annette Kezabu who will be joining us, but right now I am seated alongside a lady who is a part of the Nation Media Group. Her name is Angela Nampel, and she is the head user hub at the Nation Media Group. Good morning to you, Angela.
Good morning, Priscilla.
How are you?
Fine. Good morning to the viewers as well.
What does World Press Freedom Day mean to you?
Well, it means that renewed commitment to the fundamental principles that communication in print and electronic media should be a right that is freely expressed. So it's a renewed commitment every time we reflect upon it and see what steps we've taken either forward or maybe backward, unfortunately, and how to remedy and go forward.
Okay.
And preserve, yes.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Ms. Angela. We are also joined by Gerald Waluye, who's the research lead at ACME. Good morning to you, Gerald.
Good morning.
And I will ask you the same question as you greet our audience. What World Press Freedom Day means to you?
I think it's a day when we reflect on our work and how it's received. It's a day when we remember some of our colleagues who have had challenges in doing their work, especially those who have been harassed. So it's a day to chart a way forward of how best we can do our work without being highly threatened.
Okay, all right. So, Ms. Angela, you have mentioned the fact that the fundamental principles, and I believe that journalism is under the threat from the internet as we know it, and social media platforms out there that are growing leaps and bounds by the day. As NMG, how are we going through the protection of journalism from our end?
I think the most important thing that we trade in is information. So what we can arm ourselves first with is information for our journalists. And when you look at the threats which we can counter and which are growing, one of them is disinformation, conspiracy theories, propaganda, a lot of things that have been floating around. One brought forward by the COVID-19 pandemic, among other things. We've seen things like the war in Ukraine and how it has highlighted, and among other things. There's so much disinformation. So we do training for our journalists on how to fact check. How do you separate the truth from the lies? But we are also going into partnerships with other media, internationally and locally, where we can come up with projects that we, research. We arm ourselves with the capacity to do more in-depth, deeper, and leverage on all our strengths to be able to gain the trust, to regain the trust. Because one of the things that is under attack is public trust in the media. While you have all these things floating around, the propaganda, the disinformation, people wonder what to believe. So one of the ways to protect ourselves is, one, through those partnerships to do deeper and more, and strengthen our capacity, but also to train. The other thing is the legal frameworks that threaten. We have contentious laws. While, part of it is good intentioned, the others can be interpreted.
Can you highlight for us one of those laws that are contentious?
I think for us here in Uganda, the Computer Misuse Act 2011 is one that we've seen many people arrested on that front, and you know there's different interpretations and arguments here and there, you know, depending. So those are laws that it is perceived can be interpreted one way or the other.
Okay, all right. And so while it's intended for good, what are the loopholes that you identify through that Computer Misuse Act?
I think the loopholes, where it comes to offensive communication, I think that's where many people have been, the law has sort of got them. It is hard to interpret how do you disturb somebody's peace, privacy, where are the limits, those kinds of things. So that's where we still have some ways to go.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Thank you so much. Now, I will turn to Gerald Waluya, who's a research lead at the Africa Center for Media Excellence.
Yes.
You work with an institution and in research particularly, and I think one of those things fall in research as far as you know, how to protect the journalism fraternity from the digital siege. And so we want to find out from you, is journalism in the field and the journalists themselves prepared for the threats that are posed by the presence of the new normal, which is the internet?
I think over time, threats to journalists have been evolving. And especially now that we talk about digital journalism and digital media. In the past, we have been used to threats such as being beaten and things like that. But now we have online threats where people send you messages, give you calls. So in most of the cases in the past, most of our journalists have not been prepared for these types of threats because they are not what they are used to ordinarily. So we are trying to prepare our journalists, especially given the fact that these are things that they normally will not study in an education institution. Yeah. So we equip journalists with skills of how to prepare themselves and how to secure themselves physically and online so that they can stay safe and continue to do their work. But this is still on a smaller scale because most of the journalists, especially those working in upcountry, have not yet had as many opportunities, especially as the ones who are in the city who are able to receive some of the trainings. Although we have made efforts to see that we always try to include journalists from upcountry so that they can also benefit with this kind of knowledge.
Okay, all right. You definitely bring in something very interesting. Online threats, that's something that journalists are struggling with, and it's bringing about depression and people choosing either to put down their tools of trade or fight back. Now, that's another challenge that I'll come back to you, Gerald. On to you, Angela. Some have attempted to actually place content behind paywalls. Is that easy?
Placing content behind paywalls is not easy. As a media house that is in the process or has tried it. One, it raises issues. One is something I hinted on earlier, the public trust or the mistrust thereof. You'll get questions, what are you going to do with our data? Because placing a wall means there's a gate where when you get there, you might have to surrender your ID, in this case your online ID of some sort. So there are all those, we have to look at ourselves as a media house. How do we look at data protection and ensuring that we continue to build that trust with our online audiences, but also to have a gateway and feedback mechanisms. Can we hear back? If there are threats, then maybe we can have those mechanisms to be able to find out exactly what's happening.
Okay, all right. And in that regard, do we have solutions as far as from your Department of Research at ACME? Do we have solutions that we can actually use to deal with that?
I think the idea of a paywall is sometimes problematic, especially in most of the media houses that have tried it in Uganda. It is still a challenge to monetize the digital platforms on the side of business for especially newspapers, that people are not willing to pay. But there are also these other attacks which come through the online. Sometimes a whole website can be pulled down. So there doesn't seem to be any quick solutions at the moment.
Okay, and in reference to that, Angela, what are the challenges that you have faced as a user hub in order to push through the digital era and utilize it as an opportunity rather than a threat?
Okay, some of the challenges are technological, others are economic. You know, people have to balance their needs. Am I going to pay for data to be online, or am I going to pay for all the other needs, you know, soap and all the different things? So there's that balance, the economic. So we have to compete for, you know, on the hierarchy of needs. But also there's, besides the economic, there's the technological. People still need to catch up with some of the things that maybe we are introducing. So you put up a wall, people have to come in and put in passwords, and you know, they have to work through a number of things. So you have to also go through sensitization and education and say, this is how you do it. This is what happens when you. So it's a journey that we have started, and hope we can get innovative in terms of looking at the cost, how to package to make it affordable and those sorts of things.
What has been the response of the end user in this regard?
Of course, when you're going into this journey of trying to put up a paywall, or in our case, starting with the data wall, you have to do a little bit of preparation. So the response, we did a launch, you know, you have to look at your content. What are you offering? So some of the response was positive, because when some people come over the wall, they realize, oh, there's something good on the other side. So yes, we continue to have the interest, and it continues to stimulate us now to do better by our audiences. You know, we reflect every time we look at the numbers, we say, how can we do better? How can we do journalism that people trust, that people feel is up to the standard for which we would like to monetize?
Okay, all right. You've also mentioned, of course, one of the challenges having been economic related, and yet we must make profits. It's a business at the end of the day. You must, you know, remunerate profits. Then again, we're looking at journalism, which is something that we do, and we trade information. So it must be put out there, and we must adapt to the new normals. So what are the other options that are available for us to protect journalism, but at the same time keep it profitable enough for those that have the money to keep investing?
It's well, that's one of the challenges we're trying to solve, that balance. Keep doing good journalism, but keep it affordable for the people to. So we look at internally, we look at our own systems. Can we be more efficient? Can we leverage on technology to do things in a way that saves us money, so that we can then offer a product, you know, at less cost? So those are some of the things we're still working through.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Then this brings me to the research lead here. Over time, under the center, have we come up with sort of models that can actually ensure that the media houses are able to survive the digital era?
I think at the moment there are no specific models that we have come up with. But we certainly have examples of different places which have used different means to sustain themselves. For instance, some newspapers in Europe receiving donations, so then they are able to open up their platforms so that people can access them. But others which are more which are more market-oriented, of course, opt for the paywall. It's a difficult situation because in one way to have some form of vibrant journalism, it needs to be well financed. At the same time, the modes of financing are becoming increasingly difficult to sustain. So it's a bit of a challenge at the moment that most of the media managers need to think through and find solutions. So at the moment, there are no specific answers to this.
Okay, all right. There's also the question of ethics. There's also integrity, the trusted sources vis-a-vis the fake news that is out there. Anyone can say anything, but where can we draw the line in ensuring that we still retain authenticity, and we also get to retain ethics in the use of journalism as a fourth estate in serving the country, the people, the users?
I think that goes back to, again, training, but also motivating our people, and then strengthening our editorial function to know that, okay, we have a gate, we have good gatekeepers, so at some point we will be able to, like I said, we have a lot of disinformation, we'll be able to sieve through. But we also have those channels, we open channels of communication, so we are held accountable by the public. It's not that we are sitting back by ourselves and doing and giving what we choose, but we have established channels where we can be held accountable for what we do.
Okay,
yes.
All right, and then the other bigger question that would come into conversation with in the wake of journalism under digital siege is the whole question of the quality of content. How do we get to protect traditional media houses and their quality of content vis-a-vis everything else that is lashed out there without any necessary editorial checks?
One of the things that I hinted on earlier, and maybe it may help to answer the earlier question of how are we handling the economic challenges. Some things we are going to have to be quite innovative. Among the things we have done is partnerships, where you get into partnerships with others and try to produce syndicated quality work. This is just one of different modes of trying to, but coming up with different strategies to try and see that we, in a tight economic situation, we operate efficiently, but we try also to ensure that we get opportunities for our journalists to get more experience and training. So even if we are thinner, we can still do more efficient. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Well, Miss Angela, the other challenge now is how do you merge the two? Rather than fight them, you can join them. How do we get to merge the two, traditional journalism and digital journalism, and still service and trade what we have, information?
Yes, I think we've looked at examples elsewhere of how others have done it. There are some models of convergence that are coming up, where you don't wake up and say, okay, I'm getting rid of maybe my print product, but you incorporate by looking at what within your print product can then be turned, or which people, which resources can then be leveraged to use for your producing your digital content, and maybe even giving people skills, new skills, yes, to be able to equip them for where they need to go.
Okay, all right. Yes. Of course, Miss Angela has duties elsewhere to perform after 8 o'clock, so we must leave her to go to attend to those duties. But finally, just what would be your advice for journalism entering into this new era? There are journalists out there, they're young, they're vibrant, and they think that they should go digital all the way, or digital 100%. What would be your piece of advice?
I think one, we should not completely get rid of the values of the past. The credibility, the values that we have carried from the legacy media. We should keep these in mind, even as we come with an open mind to innovate, because now in the new world or in the new setting, we either innovate or we die. So we come with an open mind, but carrying our values from the past. Be willing to take on and experiment with new technologies. It won't be easy, but we test, we try, and we see what works.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much, Ms. Angela. And you've had it from it all comes down to the values. What is your mission and your vision that should be embedded in how you then get to adapt and try out these new forms of journalism that are available? The digital era is here to stay. We can't change it. As digitalization is concerned, we can't negate the fact that it's the new normal, but we have to find ways of actually living with it, more so thriving through it as journalists. Now we get to have Dr. Annette Kezabu joining us, and she's the head postgraduate studies at Uganda Christian University. Good morning to you, Doctor.
Good morning.
You're most welcome.
Good morning, viewers.
What does this day mean to you? World Press Freedom Day. What's your understanding of this day?
Without going very much deep into it, because I might end up in certain places.
It's very fine.
But it is very important that journalism and communication and the media is recognized on this day, that there must be freedom, and that if freedom is curtailed, then there can be no news, there can be no nothing that journalism brings to the table in terms of, you know, whatever comes from the satellites, let's just say. So for me, World Press Freedom Day is a day when we as journalists also reflect on our work, but also as governments also must reflect on the work of journalism, and as the fourth estate, what it brings to the table.
Okay, all right. And we're talking about the journalism and the digital siege right now. Yes. In the past 5 years, in your capacity, to you, what do you see have been the outstanding threats to journalism through digital eras?
First of all, I don't think that journalism is besieged by digitalization. I believe it's complementary actually, because I am an academic. So in terms of training, I think that journalism works better with digitalization. Why? What we have been doing in the traditional media, you know, how we have always trained students to gather news, to publish news, to distribute it, has been a certain traditional way, and books are written in a certain way. And when digitalization came in, I think it came to wake us up, to say, hey, there are many ways of doing things, and if you don't join this wagon, you might be left out. So for me, that way, a wake-up call, and then also being complementary, bringing all sorts of platforms that we can now publish and distribute news, and then also all sorts of ways of gathering news and all sorts of ways of packaging news. So this is a complementary thing, not a threat. You're talking about the last 5 years, so much has changed. A lot changes when you have, when I joined journalism, and I remember as I was doing my internship at the New Vision around 2001, we used to have like one camera guy, and then you go with a camera guy, come, they develop the photos in the dark room, the negatives, you know. All these things have gone away, the time that has been gained through that, the quality of the pictures that come out, the precision with which things are done. You don't need that one guy to be the one doing things, so that when he's sick, then you have a problem. So I think that then gathering news has become much easier. And I think also packaging news, how news goes out very fast. You know, you don't wait to first go, well, you can have the break, you can break the story quickly, and then it can go through its different forms, processes. But as people have already got the news, now we are not worried about the scoop. Who has the scoop? After all, we have citizen journalism, where people can break this news even while you are still in the field. But we are working very well with that, knowing that it's not all about scoop now. It's about having a clearer story. And I think that people are still seeking out a better story, than a better, well-researched story, than just the sensational thing. The sensational thing can come out, but then they say, let us wait for the newspaper to come out and we confirm. Okay. So I think that's the complementary role I'm talking about. All
right, complementary role. Jared Waluya, who is the lead researcher at the Africa Center for Media Excellence, is still with us. And in light of what Ms. Kezabu has actually mentioned, gathering, compiling, packaging of news, of information in the presence of digital era, in the research capacity, how do we adopt in terms of gathering and in terms of packaging information to then dispense it to the end user and the consumer?
I think to start with her point, I think although digitalization has come with so many advantages, as she has ably explained, it has also come with a number of threats. As I said earlier, that some of the threats that we previously knew to take place in the traditional way, for instance, being beaten, are now moving online. Recently, I was doing a study on how online harassment is affecting Ugandan female journalists, and you can't believe some of the things that people tell you. So many journalists are receiving...
What are some of the things that the female journalists are sharing?
They are sharing stories of how people, some of these are even ordinary people who send them messages, body shaming them, and also hurling insults at them for stories they have done that have not gone according to maybe how they like. So the digital age has also come with these kinds of threats. Going back to the question you asked on how we can package news, I think this is now more clear that you can no longer maintain one specific platform, for instance print. You need to develop content which is tailor-made for digital platforms. For instance, if you are a newspaper, you need to have a website where you have content which is tailored to website formats, without necessarily pulling the exact newspaper and then putting it online. So these are things that may in future help newspapers and other traditional media to generate revenue. I see you who are in TV now, you operate on YouTube, and you're able to reach way beyond what an ordinary person is able to watch on a local TV. So I think these are opportunities that the media need to exploit and benefit from.
Okay, all right. Dr. Kezabu, in your capacity in terms of training and preparation of the next generation of journalists, professionals entering into this digital era, how are you preparing them for things like what Jared has mentioned, the digital harassments that are out there that, again, don't have any protection per se yet? They don't have any control or acts that are there to protect them now. So in the presence of such challenges, how are we preparing the next era of journalists?
Thank you very much. I think that, well, the digital age has added on to the harassment. Everything good or bad or I don't want to be binary, but everything that comes, every new invention also comes with its ills and that we have to deal
Pros
with.
And cons,
yes. Yeah. So in this one, yes, even physically, females were always harassed in the media. I mean,
they still are.
Yes, and you know, assaulted sometimes, and so we have had to. We still have many journalists actually who are female who join the profession, who know that these things are there. But going back to the training, the way we are doing it, because of course it came as a challenge. It found, you know, older professors, for example, you know, older lecturers who, you know, these things also go with a certain age. So those have, yes, those have had to adapt and adopt and do things differently. Also, of course, we have had to tailor our curriculum now differently if we have to be competitive. So we have written new curricula where we include the new media, where students are producing now vlogs, blogs, websites.
Yes, I've actually seen a UCU student who was vlogging through their internship process. So that's interesting.
Yes, and talking about internships, we have also followed up to see that where they go to intern are places where they will learn new things and new media, so that they are all-round students or professionals when they come out. And even us ourselves have had to go back to training. We always have, like at UCU, we always have people training us in multimedia, in this or the other. For example, I know that we are partnering with Ultimate Media Consult, who come in regularly to train the staff and students. And very interesting that, you know, traditionally you didn't have staff and students coming together and, you know, training. But this time, because everything is online, we join our students and still train with them. But of course, we have to read ahead and be ahead of them if we have to train them. But then also, this coming of the digital age has put us in another place in terms of how we train. We are no longer just in the traditional way. The lecturer would come and give a lecture for 3 hours. But this time it's more student-centered. You might find a student who has, you know, who has knowledge and is prolific in these things. And this one is a peer who trains others. And also, you as the facilitator of knowledge will learn a thing or two. So we have seen that the training also has changed. We have seen the curricula have to change. We have seen that the way assignments are given have to change. We have to give assignments sort of in the new way now. And we have seen that some students thrive better. So this is complementary in a way that those students who were talented that way with ICT, but not with the academic of cramming, as you know, the Ugandan way that has always been, those have now thrived. And then we have found that students end up getting jobs even before they come out of university. Those who are good, and it is known. So, so many advantages for students, I tell you, and some advantages for the institutions and for the trainers there.
Okay, all right. I definitely cannot add to that. Dr. Kezabu has put it right, that journalism may not actually be under digital siege as we could be thinking about it. Maybe it's an opportunity that we need to embrace. The institution has embraced it, UCU. As trainers, it has been embraced. And as students, she's seeing more responsiveness from the next journalists of this era. Now, we want to turn to you. Today is World Press Freedom Day, and we want to find out from you, what are your comments on the current state of journalism in Uganda? What is your comment on the current state of journalism in Uganda? Go over to our social media platforms on Twitter and Facebook, #Morning and NTV, and give us your opinion in that regard, of course, depending also on what they submit here. Now, Dr. Kezabu has given us a good testimonial, Mr. Waluya.
Yes.
Does this testimonial spread to ACME, at the center of media excellency? Do we see the same adaptation in terms of delivery of services and streamlining and educating and making journalists better people? Have you had to also adapt the same?
I think we are doing exactly the same. That first of all, we offer online training to journalists, and that has helped journalists, even those who are up country, to benefit from our trainings. But we also have online resources that we make available to journalists so that they can self-learn through our platform. That has helped a lot, but we keep checking and changing depending on what is happening on the ground, because we can't stick to the same things when the world is moving on. So we are also certainly working hard to see that we prepare journalists for these kinds of threats through the trainings that we give them to prepare them, because one of the ignored effects of attacks is the issue of mental health, that some journalists are affected mentally because of these attacks. So we need to psychologically prepare them to know what to expect when they go to the field and how to respond to some of these things when they happen, because it's a matter of when, not whether they will happen or not. So these are things we have been working on.
Okay, all right. Checks and balances, how do you get to apply them with this digital era?
Journalistic checks. I think you earlier asked a question of ethics, and I think it's a very important question in the digital age, because one of the causes of attacks actually to journalists is that some do their work in unethical ways, so that has attracted attacks on their side. So there is absolutely a very important aspect of maintaining ethics even when they are working online, through following the same values that Angela earlier alluded to, that we need to stick to the traditional principles and values of journalism, no matter whether we are doing it digitally or whether we are doing it in a traditional way. So the same values of journalism must continue to apply whether we are online. So that is what will help us to stay focused.
Okay, and Dr. Kezabu, does ethics have anything to do with our struggle to connect with the audiences and the masses through journalism right now?
I am just going to re-echo what the two have talked about. The place of ethics can never change. And the place of our good old traditional way of training students in journalism has not changed as well. What I have actually been explaining is what you add on to something to even spice it up. And I was looking at the digital journalism as a spice, but not to completely do away with the traditional media way of doing things. So even as we're training, I think in every curriculum, both undergraduate, postgraduate, there's no curriculum that does not contain, you know, a module on ethics, you know, worldviews and ethics. That's always there. Why? Because we know that we are training people who are also going to, who have character, who are going to come out, especially in UCU now. People of character matter. It matters to us more than anything else. So it's even if you are a cheat or a fraud, I'm talking about in terms of journalism, it becomes easier for you to do that cheating when using the digital journalism. But we are emphasizing ethics all the time because we know that however good a journalist you are, if you don't have the necessary ethics, then you are definitely going to fall into the traps, there are many, of what has affected other journalists before whose ethics was not up to the standard. So ethics is very important to us.
Okay, all right. There's another thing that is tied within the digital, introduction or the era. That's content creation. Content creation is no longer streamlined, for lack of better words. In terms of who does the checks and balances, the researching, the development, and therefore the dispensation of this content that is created. Now we're talking about an era, especially from your capacity, who is having young people getting into the journalism field. They're more interested in having the camera and vlogging and blogging and writing, but then they're not interested in actually making sure that the content they're putting out there, one, is protected by the spaces that are supposed to protect it, but more so they have themselves also protected. And at the end of the day, we have seen young people who have ended up committing suicide, getting into depression, simply because of cyberbullying. Why? Because of the content that they have created, thinking it's cool content, but at the end of the day, it's content that's going to cost them a life and a time, a day, something like that. So how are you controlling it through what you're delivering at the Institute?
Well, I heard one time that there are some people who buy borders and jump on them without any prior training and start riding in Kampala. That is how it is in the digital age. That some students just jump onto the bandwagon. But we are also, what we are doing mostly is counseling. And most of the books they leave behind, their dissertations, we encourage them to write about these things, the concerns that you have. We encourage them to write about cyberbullying. We encourage them to write about what can possibly happen online, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And through that, they become aware before they go there. There is no policy yet. Mm-hmm. Everybody can create anything, and you can imagine the chaos there. So we are aware of the chaos, we talk about the chaos, we counsel students about the chaos, and we verbalize it even in their groups, because even in training, as I said, we are not training the traditional way anymore. We put them in groups. They have to come and discuss in class, which was not happening before. We now acknowledge that students also know a thing or two. So we let them discuss, and as they are discussing, these issues always come out. We discuss them openly, and they go as they know. But we cannot say that there is a law protecting them. We make sure that they know about this, and they know how to go around it in case it happens to them.
Okay, all right. Gerald, in the presence and the wake of this digital era, we may call it a seed. It's an opportunity, but also it's a threat in one way or another. A threat in terms of it, we could be seeing it pushing out some media platforms at the end of the era. And so how do we get to either protect these platforms from going outdated, or do we actually have to come to a place where we accept that they will have to be outdated and we move on to the next thing?
I think since the coming of internet, there have always been death bells, especially for the newspaper. But somehow they have tried to limp on and stay in business. So I think even up to this day, they are able to continue adapting and adopting to the new technological advancement to benefit from the internet as well, rather than to be pushed out by the internet. So there are certain opportunities that the traditional media can adopt. For instance, you spoke about the paywalls earlier, and we don't know, maybe in future people may start subscribing online and reading newspapers online. The same is happening with the TV and radio. People are able to watch and view content online. So I think they are already in the right direction towards survival, even amidst this digital, you call it a digital siege. So I think there are prospects that they may not completely die out, although their business may shrink. So there are still a few chances that they can continue surviving.
Okay, all right. Again, as we're having this conversation, we want to hear your 2 cents in regards to the World Freedom Press Day that we're talking about today. What's your comment on the current state of journalism in Uganda? And as we hear from you later on, Dr. Kezabu, turning to you, you did make mention and hint of government and its intervention in as far as protection of journalism as a third estate.
Yes, government has a role still to protect
the fourth estate.
The journalists, yeah, as the fourth estate. In terms of policy, now that we have digitalized, there must be policy against exploitation, against bullying, in other words, that there must be a law that comes out to protect the journalists. We cannot go around that. There is something, I'm sorry, but I need to comment on. Sometimes when we get something that comes and people comment on it, and now today it has come out in the theme as a siege. But sometimes I think it is overrated, and what is happening in the West is not necessarily what is happening in Africa, if we can also have that conversation. That mindsets in Africa have not changed. We can use all excuses. Maybe people are poor, they're not able to afford data. But we find that people who have data, actually, who have the money, are the ones who are buying the news, the hard, newspaper. Why? Because the mindset has not changed. There's a way they have classified this new media and digitalization as, for joking and for doing these other things. But when I want serious business, I turn to the traditional media. There is that mindset still there in Africa. And specifically in Uganda, we see that the traditional media is not really phased. When we could have seen that, during the COVID time, because that was the most testing time for every entrepreneur and for every journalist even. But we saw that indeed they survived. We saw that actually they thrived, and we saw that they were recognized by government as there are some of the people, apart from medical practitioners, journalists also had press cards and they were able to go around, which means not lawyers or any other people, but journalists were able to go around. What does that mean? That government recognizes the role of journalism in that way, that they must gather and distribute news. So, well, apart from providing the necessary policy, the survival of the traditional media is going to depend on how quickly also these media houses adopt and adapt. And there's another thing I wanted to comment on about the big conglomerates. That is also foreseen, being able to swallow the smaller media. There is that bit, because if you go to New Vision, for example, the Vision Group, yeah, so one journalist like this can collect news and distribute to their TV, to their radio, to their press, to their even to their websites and all that, their blogs, to their Twitter and Facebook, all those new media. But a smaller media company will have that one journalist, but then will need many more to do that because they don't have necessarily all those channels. So that we must also be cognizant of, that the smaller media have now to collaborate. For example, I'll give you, now I'm not talking about media. Many institutions, higher institutions of learning have understood that, and they are now collaborating with other training multimedia companies, so that they can also stay informed, afloat, and effective in terms of innovation.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Kezabu. Finally, Gerald, how can we as journalists actually prepare ourselves for this digital future that is now?
I think we need to do certain things right. One, first of all, is to prepare ourselves to get trained in some of these things, that so that we know what to expect. But also, I think in Uganda, journalists need to learn to work together. She was talking about working together. So they need to learn how to work together. They need to make very strong trade unions in terms of organizations that bring them together and give them good leadership. But also they need to learn to talk about their issues. Journalists are people who report about problems other people are facing, but they are people who rarely talk about their own issues. So they need to learn to bring their issues to the fore so that they can be discussed and solutions are found for some of the challenges that they face. For instance, the harassment that we talk about, the beating and things like that. So these are some of the things that I would want journalists to do, but also further training is something that they need to work on. They need to, those who can't go in universities can take courses, for instance, with Africa Center for Media Excellence and other media support organizations, so that they skill themselves, because some of the things that are coming up are new to them. They are not things that they are familiar with. So they need to get well skilled in doing some of these things.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much, Gerald. Thank you so much, Dr. Kezabu. And of course, you've heard it from the horse's mouth. Exploitation, cyberbullying, those are all just side, but we can look at it as an opportunity. And if we apply the, nuggets of wisdom that Gerald has just stated, one, join trade unions. Two, while you report about others, are you reporting about yourself as a journalist? Are you dealing with yourself and the things that you're experiencing on this journey of journalism, especially adapting to the future that is the digital era right now, and so many other things? So the ball is in your hands. Now, of course, you have given us your opinions and your comments on our social medias. When we return, we're going to be looking at some of your answers in the perspective of your understanding of the state of journalism here in Uganda.